You could train all you want. You could put as much mechanical tension as you want. You can progressive overload all you want. You could do all the weekly volume in the world, all the nucleus overload in the world. If you do not have, there is zero muscle growth. Hey guys, what's going on? Megan here. Alright, huge video ranking all of the factors related to muscle growth. And I'm going to show you guys which are mandatory for muscle growth. So they're going to go in I'm about to not category. The ones that are fucking amazing. So those are the ones that maximize muscle growth. They're not mandatory, but they're needed if you want to maximize muscle growth in a short amount of time. The ones that are okay, meaning they don't really hurt. Bad, the ones that you got to be careful with. And obviously the ones that are pure garbage, meaning the ones that are actually detrimental for muscle growth. So this list is going to be your guide forever whenever you're looking for a workout program, whenever you're looking to create your own workout program. And the reason for this is because there is so much confusion out there. Remember guys, I've been doing this for over a decade and I've seen every trend come and go. I've seen the myths, I've seen the bullshit. And trust me, as a beginner, it can be very confusing. So I'm going to use all of my 17 years of experience combined with all of the scientific articles that I've read over time. Keep in mind guys, I read over 10,000 articles, scientific articles in the last decade. And out of those 10,000, I have over 4,500 saved on my computer that I can pull up at any time, right? So this is my shit. This is my obsession, my life's passion. I understand muscle growth down to the molecular and genetic level, both from an experimental perspective, through experience, of course, through coaching countless people, and also through the scientific lens. So let's smash all the myths and let's get straight to it. All right, let's start with the most important one, right? Anabolic signaling. I'm going to put that in I'm about to not category, obviously, right? Long story short, muscle growth is simply a combination of DNA transcription and mRNA translation, right? Your body has to copy the gene needed to make whatever protein, in that case, actin, myosin, whatever, right? And then your body has to translate it. That's it. Transcription, translation, copy and paste, right? That's what leads to myofibrillar protein synthesis. So that's an I'm about to not category, right? So for your transcription factors, you have the androgen receptor, which is the main one, along with SRF, blah, blah, blah. And obviously for translation, you have the IGF-1, mTOR, P70N6K pathway. So this is the measuring stick that we're going to use to rank everything. Next, mechanical tension. Everyone thinks it's going to go in I'm about to not category. No, it's in fucking amazing category. Believe it or not, you do not need mechanical tension in order to stimulate anabolic signaling. That's one of the biggest myths in the fitness industry because most people have no idea how muscle is actually built. It is the best factor that we have available to us as naturals, but it is not mandatory for muscle growth. Perfect example is that if we put you in a hospital bed for 4 weeks, immobilized, and we inject you with a crap ton of steroids, guess what? You're going to build some muscle. You're not going to turn into Ronnie Coleman, but you're going to build a lot of muscle, and that's without moving at all, which obviously shows that you do not need mechanical tension to increase anabolic signaling. It's just the best tool that we have as naturals. Another example, if we delete your myostatin gene, or if you're born with a myostatin mutation, without even moving a fucking finger, you're going to have hypertrophied muscles. Once again, showing you that you do not need mechanical tension to stimulate muscle growth. If we inject you with follistatin and we immobilize all of your limbs, stop you from moving, guess what? You're still going to build a ridiculous amount of muscle even without moving a limb, which once again destroys the belief that you need mechanical tension to build muscle, right? So I could go on and on, but this video is going to be too long. But long story short, mechanical tension isn't fucking amazing. You need it to maximize muscle growth, but you do not need it to start muscle growth. In fact, after eating a protein-rich meal, if you just sit on your ass and eat some protein, guess what? Myofibrillar protein synthesis is going to go up, meaning you're actually building muscle. The only downside is without training, it's going to come right back down, and it's not going to be sustained for a long amount of time. So everyone has it backwards, mainly because they do not understand the pathways through which muscle is built. But anyway, mechanical tension, fucking amazing. You definitely need it to maximize muscle growth. Next, high threshold motor unit recruitment. Obviously, fucking amazing category, right? For you to grow muscle fibers through mechanical tension, of course, you have to recruit the goddamn muscle fibers, right? And if you do not recruit your high threshold motor units, which are obviously the ones that control the biggest and most powerful muscle fibers, and also the ones that have the most runway for growth, then you're not going to make a lot of gains. It's common sense, right? That's why you don't build muscle from just opening the fridge, right? Because you're recruiting your low threshold motor units, right? You don't build muscle from picking up your cell phone and putting it down. Why? Because you're only recruiting your low threshold motor units. But if you want to build maximum muscle, obviously you're going to have to recruit the high threshold motor units, which are the neurons that are connected to the most and the biggest amount of fast twitch muscle fibers. Another example of that is when people say, hey, we walk on our legs all day, how come our legs don't just infinitely get bigger? Yes, because you're using the low threshold motor units in your legs to walk. You're not using the high threshold ones. Next, high motor unit force production. Fucking amazing, right? Remember, it's not enough to recruit your high threshold motor units, right? You also have to have them produce force, right? Meaning the actin and myosin cross bridges have to form. Right? I could go into the force velocity relationship, but my physiology nerds already know what I'm talking about, right? That's the reason why throwing a football recruits your high threshold motor units, because obviously you have to use a lot of effort, right? But you're not going to build muscle from just throwing the football all day, simply because even though you're recruiting your high threshold motor units, they're not producing a maximum amount of force. Therefore, they're not exposed to a high degree of mechanical tension. So how do you have your high threshold motor units produce as much force as possible? Again, that's where the force velocity relationship comes in, right? Long story short, that's when you're doing high effort repetitions under low speed, right? Not low speed intentionally, but unintentional low speed, right? So that, long story short, so that's when you're trying to contract your muscle. You're trying to, let's say, do a barbell curl. You're trying to move the weight as fast as possible, but the weight is moving up slowly because the weight is too heavy or the muscle is too fatigued, right? So that's how you get maximum force production. Right? So that's high effort combined with low velocity. Not purposely slowing down the weight. If you purposely contract the muscle slowly, then obviously you're not doing this, right? It has to be against your will. All right, next. High volume. Again, fucking amazing to maximize muscle growth. I'm not going to beat a dead horse about that. If you don't know the importance of high weekly volume to maximize muscle growth by now, then I can't help you. I have so many videos on the topic, right? That's the reason why you can't build maximum muscle from doing one set a week, right? What do you think that is, right? One set a week is mechanical tension, right? You're applying tension to the muscle. But why is it that one set a week is not enough to build huge muscles? Because it's not enough volume. So it's the volume of mechanical tension that drives muscle growth. And obviously there's an inverted U curve. So you know, that's common sense. You can't just infinitely do more volume and infinitely grow, right? That's just fucking retarded. Everything has an inverted U curve. Everything. That's why I laugh when people say, oh, volume versus intensity. Intensity is more important than volume. I'm like, you guys sound stupid as shit, right? If volume was not important, you could literally go to the gym and do one set of your 1 rep max, and that's it. That's all you would need. Walk into the gym, do one set of your 1 rep max, and go home. And you see how you look like after a year of doing that, right? You're actually going to lose muscle, right? Which shows you that intensity is not enough. It's the volume of intensity, the volume of tension that drives muscle growth. And a ridiculous amount of studies have confirmed this, right? That's why 3 sets of 10 builds way more muscle than 3 sets of 1, even if you're doing 3 sets of your 1 rep max. What's the difference? They both have mechanical tension, but why is it that the 3 sets of 10 builds more muscle than the 3 sets of 1? More volume, right? Therefore, more anabolic signaling, more creation of ribosomes, more mRNA translation, and therefore more myofibrillary protein synthesis. Next, heavy weights, as in less than 5 reps to failure. Right? Meaning about 90 to 95% of your 1 rep max, depending on the exercise. Usually about 95% of your 1 rep max. It's okay, but it doesn't hurt, right? And I've been debunking this myth for over a decade, and now the studies are numerous, right? All the guys who used to argue back and forth with me about this shit are silent now, right? Bunch of crickets, right? 10 years ago, everyone was saying, oh my God, you need to lift brutally heavy weights in order to build muscle, right? And now you guys are finding out that this is complete BS. You could build muscle with 10 reps, 15 reps, 20 reps, 25 up to 30 reps, right? As long as you go close to failure, of course. So lifting brutally heavy weights to build muscle, again, it doesn't hurt, but it's not necessary to maximize muscle growth. I do program heavy lifting in my training programs. HSP, the first letter, stands for heavy lifting, but that's for completely different benefits than just building muscle. The reason why I program heavy lifting in HSP training is to increase your bone density, to track your recovery status, because obviously it's one of the best signs that you under recovered is if your strength is declining. And it's also to teach you how to recruit your high threshold motor units, right? I could go on and on about the benefits of heavy lifting, but again, do not think that you need to lift heavy in order to maximize muscle growth. Next, eccentrics, right? So controlling the negative. Again, okay, it doesn't hurt, right? Meaning you can still build muscle. You can build a ton of muscle without eccentric reps, but you're gonna have to do a crap ton more volume than is needed, right? So if you try to do concentrics only, right, without controlling the weight down, you're gonna have to almost double the volume, and obviously try to use even more weight in order to get the same effects, right? So it doesn't hurt, but I definitely recommend adding eccentrics into your training, right? Which is why on HSP, on the stretch day, not only you focusing on weighted stretch, but you're also focusing on eccentrics, right? You can generate a lot more force doing the negative portion. And it also has a bunch of other benefits that I covered in previous videos. Next, concentric, same thing. Okay, but doesn't hurt, right? Obviously, eccentrics are better than concentrics, right? But you can build muscle without concentric repetitions, right? And I already explained why when we went over anabolic signaling, right? And the reason why I'm not putting them higher is simply because you do not need concentrics to maximize muscle growth, right? And I'm going to go into more detail later on. For example, you can build a ton of muscle with eccentrics alone, just like you can also build a ton of muscle with concentrics alone. A perfect example of that is deadlifting. There's almost no concentric contractions in your traps, but I dare anyone to say that deadlifting or rack pulling doesn't build traps, right? Same thing with farmer walks, right? It's all weighted stretch, but yet they're phenomenal upper trap builders. Next, intensity techniques. Okay, right? So that's stuff like supersets, drop sets, rest balls, blah, blah, blah. Again, you don't need them to maximize muscle growth, and they're definitely not mandatory for muscle growth, but they also don't hurt, right? Depending on the context, right? So if you're trying to save time, for example, you guys know I love drop sets and rest balls, right? People like to call them myo reps now, but they're just rest ball sets, right? So again, they don't hurt depending on the context, but they're definitely not needed to maximize muscle growth. All right, muscle damage. I'm actually going to put it at the be careful category, right? Because yes, even though muscle damage is linked to growth in some aspects, mainly through satellite cell activation and in some cases, myonuclei donation, it is not needed to maximize hypertrophy. In fact, muscle protein synthesis is even higher when you have less muscle damage, right? It's not pure garbage, it's not detrimental because muscle damage does have some links to hypertrophy. They're just not significant. It's mainly correlational, right? It's usually a sign that you're training with high effort or whatever, right? But I put be careful because you do not want to create excess muscle damage, right? And it's almost impossible to avoid muscle damage, especially if you're new to an exercise or you're new to lifting in general, right? Again, a small dose is good because that's a sign that you're doing things right. But again, be careful. You do not want too much damage. That's why I hate the myth that's still going around that, oh, muscles need to be broken down for them to rebuild bigger and stronger. That's complete bullshit. Muscles do not need to be broken down in order to rebuild, right? You can increase cross-sectional area by adding new sarcomeres, by adding new contractile units without breaking down the pre-existing ones. That's a well-known and well-studied fact. Again, go back to what I was saying at the beginning of the video, right? If you get injected with super high doses of testosterone, even while you're laying in bed, you're still going to build some muscle, up to a point, of course, right? Meanwhile, there's zero muscle damage. So get the fuck out of here with that stupid-ass myth. Right, same thing with the myostatin example that I gave earlier. If we inject you with follistatin to block myostatin, your muscles will grow without muscle damage. If anybody still tells you, oh, you need to break down muscles so you can build them bigger and stronger, tell them that the 1980s want their pseudoscience back. Next, fast reps. I'm also going to put that at bad, right? Going too fast. So let's say you're curling or you're benching and you're going super fast. You're building almost zero muscle, no matter how heavy the weight is. Again, because of the force velocity relationship, right? If you go super fast, you're going to recruit your high threshold motor units, but they're not going to produce enough force individually, right? Remember, the contractions have to be with high effort and low velocity. They need to be slow for you to have your muscle fibers produce as much force as possible and for titin to be exposed and to start anabolic signaling, right? So if you're doing a set of, let's say, 10 reps close to failure, and the first 3 that are really, really fucking fast, they build almost zero muscle. Right, that's why plyometrics are horrible for hypertrophy for the most part. You have high motor unit recruitment, but very low force production on each individual fiber. Once again, because there's not enough time for the actin and myosin cross bridges to form. Right, therefore, titin, which is the main mechanosensor, does not have enough time to start anabolic signaling. All right, next, good form. Do you need good form? This is the funny one. Do you need good form to kickstart anabolic signaling? Of course not. Right, you could build muscle with shit form. Right, but it's obviously not recommended, obviously, right? So I'm going to put that in fucking amazing, right? Because you do need good form to maximize muscle growth, right? Simply because you're putting maximal tension on the target muscle. The reason I'm not putting it in I'm about to nut category is because, again, even if you do shit form exercise, you're still going to stimulate muscle growth, right? It's just not going to be optimal, of course. Remember, the things that go up here are the things that are needed with zero exception to build muscle. And obviously, you do not need good form to build muscle. You do need good form to maximize muscle growth, though, right? So those are two very different things. Blood flow. I'm about to nut category. This is one of the most underrated aspects of muscle growth. Once again, because most fuckers in the fitness industry have no idea how the body works. You cannot, I repeat, you cannot build muscle. You cannot have myofibrillar protein synthesis being higher than myofibrillar protein breakdown if you do not have an increase in blood flow to the muscle. That has been proven time and time again. In fact, one of the first things that happen when the muscle wants to expand is a conversion from type 2B fibers to type 2A fibers, right? Increasing capillaries, and therefore an increase in nutrients, in anabolic hormones, in oxygen, you name it, right? So another reason why when people start to impair blood flow to a muscle, right, let's say through aging or even through insulin resistance, loss of muscle quickly follows. And the reverse is also true. Studies have shown the more you increase blood flow to a muscle, the faster the subsequent hypertrophy. And in some studies, the correlation is as high as 0.90, right? That means over 80% of the changes in muscle growth can be explained by blood flow alone. And it's common fucking sense if you understand how cells work. All right, next, full range of motion. Where do you guys think this is going? Okay category. Yes, I know that sounds sacrilegious and blasphemous, but you do not need full range of motion to both stimulate or maximize hypertrophy. And the number one example of that is, like I said, farmer walks, blows the shit out of the traps, and there's zero range of motion. Rack pulls, blows the shit out of the traps, zero range of motion. Isometric contractions, build muscle, zero range of motion. And last but not least, the bench press. Everyone forgets that the bench press itself does not train the chest through a full range of motion, right? Because for a full range of motion on your pecs, your arms, your humerus actually has to go close to the midline of the body. Whereas doing the bench press, especially using the barbells, you obviously don't have that, right? Yet no one is going to deny that you could build a great set of pecs using the bench press, right? So full range of motion is absolutely overrated. In fact, because the tension curves is very, very hard for most exercises to actually train a muscle through a full range of motion, right? You have to use machines and stuff like that, right? So stop overhyping full range of motion. I've seen people build muscle with partial reps, half reps, isometrics. Like I said, many different ways to skin a cat. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't train with full range of motion, right? People like to strawman everything I say and take it out of context. I do recommend that you train with full range of motion, but for the sake of this video, do not think that it's in one of those two categories. And in fact, one way I have people train with full range of motion is I prescribe multiple exercises, right? In order to take full effect of, the strength curves. That's why on HSP training, I have you train the muscle at long lengths and at short lengths, right? So you need multiple exercises to fully train a muscle to a full range of motion. All right, next, training to failure. I'm actually going to put that at bad. I'm going to put that in the be careful category. And keep in mind, I'm referring to absolute failure, not technical failure, absolute failure, meaning gun to your head and you can no longer move the weight no matter what, right? And the reason why I'm putting that in the be careful category is because, yes, doing one set to complete absolute failure is going to stimulate protein synthesis because of what I explained earlier. You're getting mechanical tension, you're getting full motor unit recruitment, and you're getting high force production, right? But you're going to accumulate so much fatigue from that set that you're not going to be able to do multiple sets throughout that week. In fact, you're not going to be able to do multiple productive sets throughout the week, which is going to compromise, you guessed it, volume. So you're going to stimulate myofibrillar protein synthesis doing that one brutal set, right? But then you're not going to be able to train effectively that same muscle again, both due to systemic and local fatigue for the next several days, if not for a whole week, right? So it's going to hurt your weekly volume at the end of that week. So that's why even when I tell people to train to failure or close to it, I tell them train to technical failure, not absolute failure. Those are two very different things, right? Technical failure is when your form starts to break down. Absolute failure is when no matter what happens, you cannot move the weight anymore, right? That's definitely not needed to maximize hypertrophy. Now, if you're on a fuck ton of roids and you have great recovery management, great recovery capacity, then yeah, absolutely you could train to complete failure. But why? What's the point? Why generate all that extra systemic fatigue when you could just stop short of failure and do more volume and then come back 1 or 2 days later and repeat the workout again? And I don't want to hear, but during Yates. You are not doing Yates, and you're not on a fuck ton of roids that Yates was on. Next, isometrics and squeezing the muscle. Again, I'm going to put that okay, right? Obviously, it doesn't hurt. It has its place in bodybuilding. Obviously, it has a place in my program on the PD of HSP training, right? Helps with the mind-muscle connection, helps with getting a sick pump. But I'm not going to overhype it and put it in I'm about to knock category, right? Because you definitely don't need it to maximize muscle growth. I do recommend that. Keep in mind, guys, all the things in here, right, in the okay category, I still recommend them, right? So I still recommend that you incorporate them into your program right? Because they all have their own benefits. It's just they don't belong up here for molecular reasons. Next, intentional slow reps. Bad. I'm going to put that in a be careful category, right? Again, this is intentional slow reps. That's when the rep speed is slow, but because you are making it slow. Why is it bad? Again, for the reasons I explained earlier. If you're able to move the weight slowly, intentionally, then that means you do have high force production, but you have low motor unit recruitment, right? Because remember, for you to have high motor unit recruitment, the effort needs to be high. And if the effort is high, then you're not going to move it slowly. You're going to obviously try to move it as fast as possible. So you grabbing like a fucking 10-pound dumbbell and moving it slow, right? Because you're trying to increase force production, it's not going to work. Because again, you're going to increase force production, but only on the low threshold motor units because the effort is too low. Next, slow reps, but involuntary slow reps, right? So against your will. Fucking amazing. All right, so that's when the reps are slow, but not because you want them to be slow, right? They're slow because you cannot move the weight as fast as possible. That's when you get maximum motor unit recruitment, right? Because you're trying to move the weights fast. And that's when you also get maximum force production, right? Maximum mechanical tension on the muscle fibers, right? Because there's plenty of time for actin and myosin to form cross bridges. And therefore, there's plenty of time for titin to get activated and start the whole cascade of anabolic signaling all the way down to mTOR activation and P70S6K and ribosome genesis. Next, progressive overload. They're gonna have a whole video on this, but it's in fucking amazing category. It is not in I'm about to not category, and I made a whole video explaining why. Keep in mind, it also depends on how you define progressive overload, right? Progressive overload is not simply adding more weight. It's more volume, could be more frequency, could be fixing your form in order to make the exercise harder. All progressive overload means you applying a higher degree of mechanical tension and a higher volume of mechanical tension to the fibers. So whether you do that by increasing the weight, by increasing the reps, by increasing the proximity to failure, by, there's so many ways to progressive overload, right? So don't just see it as adding more weight, right? I fucking destroyed that myth so long ago, and I made so many videos about that, right? You can actually lower the weight that you're using, which is going to lead to a drop in your absolute strength long term, but still get an increase in hypertrophy. That's been proven so many fucking times. For example, if you used to lift in the low rep ranges, let's say 3 to 5 rep range, and then you switch to the 10 to 15 rep range for, let's say, 4 months, when you go back to your low rep range training again, your strength is going to be abysmal, even though hypertrophy has occurred, right? So it shows you that you do not have to increase your absolute strength in order to build muscle. Now, of course, now that you have more muscle after training, let's say in a higher rep range for a few months and building more muscle, when you go back to your heavy lifting, you're going to be weaker, but over time, you're going to be able to break past your previous plateau because you now have more muscle mass, right? Common fucking sense. But anyway, if you want more details, watch the whole video that I did on that. Next, water. I'm about to nut category. Again, I have a whole video on water, one of the most underrated things when it comes to muscle. Everyone forgets that muscle is 70% water, right? Everyone thinks muscle is protein. Muscle is 70% water, guys. Proper hydration is crucial for muscular hypertrophy. It's not optional, it is mandatory. And 99% of you motherfuckers are dehydrated, right? Chronically dehydrated. I'm exaggerating with 99, but it's definitely over 90%. Again, more details on the water video that I made. Next, training close to failure. Fucking amazing. You definitely need to train close to failure to maximize hypertrophy. You don't have to train to complete failure, but you have to be pretty damn close to it. Why? Because once again, when you're close to failure, the rep speed slows down. Therefore, you have high force production and high motor unit recruitment. So training close to failure, like I always say, RPE of 7 or 9, so leaving about 1 or 3 reps in the tank, is fine. And in some studies, you can still build a ton of muscle with up to 4 reps in reserve. Next, weighted stretch. I'm going to put that at the very top of okay, right? I wanted to put it higher, but again, got to be objective here. Based on anabolic signaling rules, you do not need to do weighted stretch exercises to maximize muscle growth, but they will speed the fuck out of the process. You guys know how much I love weighted stretching. You're going to have videos dating back over 10 years where I explain the importance of rack pulls and farmer walks and weighted dips and weighted flies and weighted pull-ups and, heavy dumbbell flies. Just go back and watch those old videos. But weighted stretching is one of the GOAT forms of training, right? Because you get maximum tension on titin, you get high force production, you get high motor unit recruitment, and obviously you get a stronger activation of the anabolic pathways. The only downside is you can't do it too much, right? So in HSP training, that's going to be on the S day, right? Your weighted stretch day. The only downside is you can't do it too much, right? Because then it's going to lead to way too much muscle damage. So once or twice a week max for most people. Next, high effort. Fucking amazing. Again, you need high effort to maximize muscle growth, right? Meaning training close to failure pretty much. Why? Once again, high effort is needed for high motor unit recruitment. So if the repetitions are not hard, chances are you're not maximizing muscle growth, right? To me, the best gauge is your fucking face, right? If you're not making faces as you're close to finishing your set, something's wrong, right? If you're able to finish the entire set without your face looking like it got stepped on by a fucking elephant, then something is wrong, right? You might want to rethink how close to failure you're training, how much effort you're putting into it. Next, training with longer rest periods. Believe it or not, I'm going to put that okay, right? It doesn't hurt, but it's not needed to maximize hypertrophy. You could train with short rest periods. The only downside is obviously you have to do more volume. You have to do more sets, right? But Megan, research shows that training with longer rest periods stimulates more muscle growth. Yeah, that's at low fucking volumes. And you should be doing high weekly volume anyway to maximize hypertrophy, right? So what's the point of training with longer rest periods if you're going to end up doing low volume? That defeats the whole fucking purpose, right? Especially if you're trying to train full body workout or upper lower or push pull and you have so many muscles to hit, you don't have time, to rest too long between sets, unless you're doing supersets, right? If you're doing supersets, obviously, then that's a different story. But the benefit of resting longer, yeah, you do get higher spikes in protein synthesis, but the workout also takes a fuck ton longer to complete, especially if you're doing full body workouts. Now again, like I said, there are ways to mitigate that with supersets, but if you're not doing supersets, then resting longer, it's not worth it, because again, you're getting more myofibrillary protein synthesis, but you're also in the gym for fucking 3 hours. Also keep in mind, there are several studies that show that drop sets are superior to straight sets, whereas drop sets obviously use extremely short rest periods, right? Less than 5 seconds. All right, so it's not that simple. Anyway, next, training with high frequency. Fucking amazing. If you want to maximize hypertrophy, you must, I repeat, you must train with higher frequency, right? See, the argument that I hate, the argument that people make is they're like, oh, well, you could hit a muscle once or twice a week and you're going to build muscle. Yeah, no shit. But we're not just trying to build muscle. We're trying to build the maximum amount of muscle we could build in a given time frame, right? So if you have, let's say, 3 months to put on as much muscle as possible, it's not even a comparison between the low frequency group and the high frequency group, right? Because with the higher frequency, you're able to do more weekly volume, more effective weekly volume. Whereas with the low frequency group, even if you try to do a fuck ton of volume for that week, you're going to have to do it in only 1 or 2 sessions, which is obviously not optimal because the last few sets are going to be low quality, right? You're going to have too much systemic fatigue, right? So the best way for a natty to maximize muscle growth is with high weekly volume spread out throughout the week, right? It's funny how years ago the fucking idiots were saying, oh, this is why I hate a lot of scientific communities sometimes, because they're constantly flip-flopping and they always catch up to what we were saying over 10 years ago, right? 10 years ago they were saying, oh, you only need to train the muscle once a week, maybe twice a week, but you're going to overtrain, right? Now they're saying, oh, you got to train at least twice a week. They're slowly catching up, right? These guys are slowly catching up. And now some of them are even recommending more than twice a week. This shit that we've been saying for over a decade, right? Now, if you're on roids, obviously you could just train once every fucking 2 weeks if you want, right? Because you're constantly elevating myofibrillary protein synthesis while simultaneously having lower protein breakdown and lower cortisol levels. But if you're natural, more frequency is key. Obviously to a point, like I said earlier, right? There's an inverted U curve and everything, right? To me, if you're a natty, you should be hitting every muscle at least 3 times a week, especially if you're advanced, right? And I would explain why, right? If you've been training for a long time, the spike you get in myofibrillary protein synthesis from training is very short-lived, right? It goes right back to baseline in less than 24 hours. In some cases, only like 16 hours. And if there's less muscle damage in that session, then that spike comes back so fucking quick. Next, increasing satellite cells, myonuclei, and obviously androgen receptor content. Fucking amazing, right? You cannot, I repeat, you cannot maximize the rate of muscle growth unless you find ways to break through the myonuclear domain limit, right? Which is the whole idea behind nucleus overload in the first place. Remember, anabolic signaling starts with DNA transcription, right? And the main molecule responsible for that is obviously the androgen receptor. And where is the androgen receptor located? Around the myonuclei, right? The more satellite cells you have, the more myonuclei you have, the greater your potential for growth, which is why in the initial stages of muscle growth, you can build some muscle without having a lot of nuclei, but to break past that plateau, to build a tremendous amount of muscle, it is literally impossible to do so without a simultaneous increase in satellite cell activation, myonuclei donation, and obviously androgen receptor content, right? Which is once again why nucleus overload works so fucking well. you increasing your androgen receptor content, you increasing your satellite cells and myonuclei, as well as your capillary networks and stuff like that. The reason why it's not higher is because, once again, you do not need an increase in satellite cells for the initial increase in muscle growth, right? You only need it for breaking past those plateaus and maximizing the response, right? And again, that's also why people on steroids not only put on muscle faster, right? Because testosterone increases the shit out of androgen receptors and satellite cells and myonuclei. But it's also why even after they get off steroids, they still can maintain a lot more muscle than a natural person. It's because they still have all of the myonuclei and satellite cells that they accumulated from years of steroid abuse, right? That's why I would say, once you go to the dark side, once you take roids, you are never fucking natural. You don't just take roids and then go back to, oh look, that was years ago, I'm natty now. Fuck off, right? You have all these myonuclei, which gives you a huge advantage at maintaining the amount of muscle that you have, even under low or zero doses of steroids. And that's how a lot of these clowns out there on social media fool you guys. They're like, oh look, I haven't taken roids in a long time and I still have a lot of muscle. You idiot, because you still have a fuck ton of myonuclei. Anyway, next. Improving your testosterone to cortisol ratio, right? So that's increasing testosterone while also keeping cortisol low, right? Because everyone forgets that it's not just about testosterone and free testosterone. It's about the balance between your anabolic hormones and your catabolic hormones, right? So the balance between testosterone and cortisol. So fucking amazing, right? And again, I'm not going to go into the science. I made a million videos about that, right? The importance of testosterone for activating the androgen receptor, which is, again, after myostatin, the most important factor when it comes to starting DNA transcription and translation in some aspects, because the androgen receptor leads to an increase in follistatin and in IGF-1 receptor, right? All the way down to mTOR activation, blah, 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 blah. So, long story short, improving your testosterone to cortisol ratio is a fucking amazing category, right? Because remember, the androgen receptor after myostatin is king, and you obviously cannot activate the androgen receptor fully without testosterone. Next, mTOR reset, fucking amazing category. If you want to maximize muscle growth, you have to. That's not optional. You have to go through an mTOR reset phase. My Nucleus overload people already know what mTOR reset is, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse over it. But long story short, you have to detrain, not deload, detrain yourself for a short period of time so that you can resensitize the muscle to anabolic signaling again. And it's funny how I was literally bro sciencing and theorizing about this over 10 years ago, and now the research is backing it up like crazy. Once again, like I always say, the science eventually catches up to the guys who are in the trenches, right? So if you've been training for more than 4-6 weeks, but without taking at least a few days off, right? Ideally at least a week, then yeah, you're still going to build muscle, but it's going to be at such a pussy return on investment for your effort, right? Because eventually your increase in androgen receptor downregulate, increase in satellite cell activation and myonuclei donation decreases, right? And again, that's your body's way of stopping you from getting too big. And the only way you could trick it is by detraining, right? Not stimulating mTOR at all for a few days, right? At least a week, right? 1 or 2 weeks ideally, so that you can restart the whole process. mTOR reset is the absolute cheat code. Next, sleep. I'm about to nut category. I'm never gonna fucking ramble about that. I have too many videos on the importance of sleep. One of the most underrated aspects of training. Right? Keep in mind, this is an I'm about to nut category, meaning it is mandatory for muscle growth, not optional. Next, spiking your anabolic hormones during the training session. Fucking amazing. Don't let nobody tell you that the acute increases in testosterone, specifically testosterone, during training is not important, right? The studies that show that there's no correlation between the spikes in testosterone during a workout and hypertrophy did not control for androgen receptor content, right? They did not control for satellite cells, they did not control for androgen receptors at baseline, right? Because we do know that androgen receptor content and satellite cell content at baseline is extremely important for hypertrophy, right? That's what decides higher responders from low responders. It's literally the amount of androgen receptors and myonuclei and satellite cells, of course, that they have in their muscle at baseline. And how do you activate those androgen receptors? Testosterone. And in fact, there's some studies that actually show that the spike in testosterone from training is needed to even reap the effects and strength gains from that session. And I also made videos when I showed you guys what happens when you actually block testosterone from spiking, or when you block testosterone altogether. What happens after weeks of training? Almost zero gains, right? So I could make a whole video on this, but I've covered this so many times. Also keep in mind that the increase in testosterone you get from training, right, assuming you're doing like a compound lift, like squats, deadlift, whatever, increases the half-life of the androgen receptor itself. which again goes back to what I said earlier, right? And also the acute increase in testosterone you get from doing, let's say, compound lifts or full body lifts, right, comes without a proportionally big increase in sex hormone binding globulin. So that means you actually get more free testosterone during that session, which obviously gets uptaken by the androgen receptor and is able to interact well with the tissues. But anyway, next, deloading. I'm gonna put that at bad. Right? I hate the idea of deloading, right? Just detrain, guys. Detrain, right? Because deloading, yeah, you're using lighter weights, but you still run the risk of stimulating mTOR. And the whole point of mTOR reset is to not stimulate mTOR or the androgen receptor for at least a week, right? So instead of deloading and using bitch weights and then risking, hurting your recovery further, just stop training, right? Guys, I know it's hard. Trust me, been there. But the benefits are unreal. You're able to break through strength plateaus when you come back, right? Obviously, the first few days back, you're going to feel weaker, but you quickly break past your previous plateau and you resensitize the muscle to growth. In addition to drastically reducing your risk of injury, right? Because you're giving your body a chance to recharge, restore, right? Your connective tissue have a chance to catch up, on and so forth. Next, compound lifts. Do you need compound lifts to maximize hypertrophy? Of course you don't, right? Even though I highly recommend compound lifts, you do not need them to maximize hypertrophy, right? You could build muscle with compound lifts or isolation lifts. I'm going to put isolation lifts right next to it, right? Doesn't matter whether you use compound lifts or isolation movements, as long as you find a way to increase motor unit recruitment and force production, you're going to stimulate myofibrillary protein synthesis, right? Now, of course, I would recommend most people to pick compound lifts over isolation lifts simply because you're able to accumulate more volume that way in a more efficient manner, right? For example, if you're doing the bench press, you're hitting your chest, you're hitting your triceps and your front delts. Now, it's not a perfect one-to-one ratio, but you're accumulating volume that way. Whereas, for example, one set of bench press is one set of chest, one set of triceps, and one set of front delts, right? Whereas an isolation lift, in that same period of time is only triceps, right? So they both have their place, right, in your training program, but for most beginners or most people who are short on time or who have a hard time accumulating weekly volume, which is very hard to do, right? Especially effective weekly volume, I recommend compound lifts. Now, if you're trying to bring up a lagging body part or you're trying to do nucleus overload, then I definitely recommend isolation lifts, unless you're really, really good at managing recovery, right? And obviously, the other benefit of isolation lifts is you're able to target the muscle without having too many other body parts cannibalize the tension. Next. Do you need the burn to maximize muscle growth? You goddamn fucking right. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of training, right? The pump and the burn and all that stuff, right? People think, oh, well, it's optional. No, it's not. Not if you understand how muscle growth works. First of all, what causes the burn? Think about it. The burn comes from an accumulation of hydrogen ions, right? Which come from obviously anaerobic respiration and the creation of lactate. Well, what produces lactate? Slow twitch muscles or fast twitch muscles? Fast twitch muscle fibers. Remember, lactate and hydrogen ions, right, which cause the burn, are the result of exhausting your fast twitch muscles, right? Remember, it is fast twitch muscles that primarily produce lactate, not slow twitch muscles, right? Because slow twitch muscles use mainly aerobic respiration, which produces carbon dioxide and water, whereas anaerobic respiration produces lactate and the hydrogen ion, which causes the burn. So the burn, long story short, and we obviously know that if you want to build huge muscles, you have to mainly hypertrophy the fast twitch muscles, right? Because the slow twitch muscles only have a very small capacity for growth, whereas the fast twitch muscles have the biggest capacity for growth, right? Which is why we want to recruit the high threshold motor units, blah, 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 right? So when you feel in the burn, that's literally an indirect cue, an indirect marker that you are using and fatiguing your fast twitch muscles, because they're the only ones that actually make you feel the burn. Now, the reason why it's not higher is because, again, you don't need the burn to build muscle, but you definitely need it to maximize hypertrophy in a short amount of time, of course, right? If you train without a burn, of course, you're going to build muscle, right? It's just going to take you a lot longer, right? Because you don't have an effective way to gauge that you're actually recruiting and exhausting your fast twitch muscle fibers. Now, to be fair, another reason why it's also not higher is because you can't get a burn training with very, very light weights, but you're obviously going to have to do a lot of fucking volume, right? And that brings us to the pump. I'm about to nut category. The case is closed. Don't let no one tell you that the pump is not important for hypertrophy. And this is so easy to prove. Not only the science proves it, the anecdotes prove it, but look, just understanding how muscles are built. will help you come to that conclusion. One, we do know that blood flow is mandatory for hypertrophy. You cannot get a pump without an increase in blood flow, obviously. Two, we know that proper hydration is mandatory for hypertrophy. Again, you cannot get a maximum pump. Notice I put max, right? Because everyone confuses the pump with just, oh, look, there's some blood in my muscle. No, I'm always referring to a maximum pump. That's when your skin is stretching, the muscle feels like it's about to explode, it burns. That's what I'm referring to, a maximum pump. You can get a normal pump from fucking jerking off, right? Of course that doesn't count, right? A maximum pump. You cannot get a maximum pump unless you're well hydrated. You don't believe me? Try it, right? Try going 1 or 2 days with shit water intake and try to get a pump. Next, a pump is also happens simultaneously with the burn, right? Because again, lactate is an osmolyte. It puts water into the cell. So it's also a sign, right? The pump is also a sign that you are using your fastest muscle fibers and you fatiguing them, right? Which is why they're producing lactate and causing the burn, right? From the hydrogen ions. Next, you cannot get a pump in a target muscle unless you're using good form, right? Try using straight form. It's going to be very hard to get a pump because a bunch of other muscles are contributing to the exercise, right? Because you have straight form. So a pump is also a sign that you're using good form. You're actually targeting the muscle that you're trying to lift. Next, it is very hard to get a maximum pump unless you're training close to failure, right? Because remember, you have to recruit your fastest fibers and you have to exhaust them. You have to go close to failure. So a pump is also a sign that you're going close to failure, and we know how important that is, right? Again, you cannot get a pump unless you're training with high effort, right? Again, a maximum pump, that is. You can get a small bitch pump, but you're not going to get a skin stretching pump unless you're training with maximum effort, right? Next, the pump, which happens concurrently with the burn, right, produces lactate. And we know lactates can lead to short increases in testosterone, right? Acute spikes. And I already mentioned the benefit of acute spikes in testosterone during training. And in fact, some vitro studies have shown that lactic acid was enough at stimulating testosterone production just as well, and if I remember correctly, in some cases even better than luteinizing hormone, right? Also, you cannot get a pump unless you have sufficient nitric oxide in your body, which is also a regulator of satellite cell activation. So I can go on and on. I already made an entire video on the pump. Watch it out. But getting a pump is a sign that you're doing damn near everything right, right? That's why when I work with clients, one of the first things I ask them, especially online clients, because I can't really see them training, so I ask them, how was your pump? To me, that's one of the best ways to know if somebody's training close to failure with proper form, targeting the correct muscle, going close to failure, and recruiting the high threshold motor units, is they get a stupid pump. Also, you cannot get a pump if you're not fully recovered, right? Try sleeping like shit, try eating like shit, right? And then go to the gym and try to get a pump. Non-existent, right? And this is nothing new, guys. Bodybuilders have known this for decades. The main confusion arises because people don't know how to differentiate between a normal pump and a maximum pump. Those are two completely different things. And as you guys know, I mentioned a study that came out over 2 years ago that showed that when groups of people train, the people that have the biggest pumps ended up building the most muscle, right? I referenced that study so many fucking times, and I'm just waiting till it gets replicated, right? But everything lines up. Cell swelling is crucial for hypertrophy. And don't even get me started on the blood flow restriction training literature. I could go on and on. But anyway, don't let nobody tell you that the pump is not crucial. Next, protein. Obviously, I'm about to knock category, right? I mean, right? You cannot, and I repeat, you cannot translate mRNA into actual protein, right, without amino acids. So high quality protein, obviously including essential amino acids such as leucine, which is obviously the king of amino acids when it comes to muscle growth. But yeah, protein is far more important than everything down here, right? Because no matter what you do, if you do not have essential amino acids, and obviously the rest of them as well, into the cell, you cannot build muscle. Period. You could train all you want. You could put as much mechanical tension as you want. You can progressive overload all you want. You could do all the weekly volume in the world, all the nucleus overload in the world. If you do not have amino acids and obviously water, there is zero muscle growth. In fact, everyone forgets that training doesn't build muscle. Protein builds muscle. What training does is training increases your body's sensitivity to amino acids. It increases your muscles' sensitivity to amino acids. It increases the spike of the muscle protein synthesis response and the duration of it, right? Which is why you can build muscle with just protein alone, but you cannot build muscle if you train and don't eat protein. I repeat, you can build muscle by just eating protein by itself with zero training. Obviously, you're not going to turn into Ronnie Coleman, but you're going to build some muscle, right? protein overfeeding studies have shown that over and over again. Whereas if you try to train and eat zero protein, you actually lose muscle. So that tells you what's more important. Next, carbs. Again, I'm going to put carbs at okay, it doesn't hurt, simply because, again, carbs are not essential. Your body can make glucose. And of course, carbs are crucial for recovery. They're crucial for maximum performance, right? Because you do need quick replenishment of glycogen after training if you want to be able to train with high weekly volume. But they're not mandatory for muscle growth. Now, again, that doesn't mean that I don't recommend it, right? Don't get it twisted. I recommend a fuck ton of carbs for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. Faster glycogen replenishment, energy levels during training, keeping cortisol low, right? The testosterone cortisol ratio. So many benefits, right? But I cannot put it higher simply because it has no direct effect on myofibrillary protein synthesis. Now, they do lower protein breakdown, but you can also lower protein breakdown with just protein. So it's the only reason why carbs are okay. Trust me, I would love to put them higher. Next, fats. I'm about to nut category. That's one of the most underrated things. People think healthy fats are optional. You need fats, not just for the production of your hormones, but also for the absorption of your vitamins and minerals, which are obviously needed for protein synthesis. And you also need fats to create the cell membrane of your, not just your muscle cells, but pretty much your whole goddamn body. All right, so healthy fats, monounsaturated fats, omega-3s, very important for the structure of your muscle cells. And obviously you need saturated fat for testosterone production and stuff like that. But again, your body makes saturated fat, so they're not really essential. But remember, just because your body makes something doesn't mean it's not important. And like I said, your body does not make omega-3, so you definitely gotta eat those. Next, vitamins and minerals. I'm about to nut category. Again, another thing that is so underrated. Everyone thinks, oh, vitamins and minerals, let me just get some here and there. They're definitely optional. Fuck no. You cannot have anabolic signaling without vitamins and minerals. Just common sense. A lot of the enzymes involved in this process, a lot of the enzymes involved in anabolic signaling require vitamins and minerals. And 99, and this time I actually mean 99% of people that I've coached in the last 10 plus years are deficient in vitamins and minerals. It's not even close. Almost everybody's deficient in vitamins and minerals, right? Because one, everyone thinks they could just pop a fucking multivitamin, even though the studies have shown over and over again that they do not fucking work for reasons that I explained a million times. And two, the ones who do take vitamins and minerals don't even take high enough doses, right? They take pussy minimum amounts that were generated for the average sedentary guy, right? Not for a person who's training full body or high frequency or high volume. So long story short, most people are deficient in vitamins and minerals, and they wonder why their gains are slowing down, right? You have the fact that our soil is deficient in nutrients. You have the fact that most vitamins and minerals compete for absorption. You have the fact that the fat-soluble vitamins, so A, D, E, K, need fats to be absorbed, and almost everyone is eating low-fat diets and shit, right? I mean, I can give you a million reasons why over 99% of people I come across are deficient in vitamins and minerals. And yet they are so crucial for muscle growth. And last but not least, caloric surplus. Do you need a caloric surplus? Is it mandatory to build muscle? No, it's not mandatory, of course not, right? You can build muscle in a deficit. It's just a lot harder. Also, obviously, if you're a beginner, you could build muscle in a deficit. If you're on steroids, you could also build muscle in a deficit, just not as much. So it's in fucking amazing category, right? A caloric surplus is a maximizer. You need it to maximize muscle growth, but you do not need it to kickstart the process because your body already has fat stores to use, right? So if you take two people who are training perfectly with everything equal, the person in the surplus is obviously going to build a lot more muscle than the person who's at maintenance or in a deficit. He's going to come with some fat as well, but hey, that's how the body works. Anyway, that's it, guys. Hope this video helps. Remember, if you're struggling with muscle growth or you're trying to maximize your muscle growth, look at the items on the first row. Make sure that everything here is in order before you even look at anything below, right? So the first row is the row that you do not want to mess with, right? You don't want to risk anything in the first row being out of whack. Next, once you have everything in the first row out of the way, you can start looking at the factors in the second row, right? The maximizers. Next, everything in the okay category is fine. You can implement them into your training. You can play around with depending on the context, right? But they should only be looked at after row 1 and row 2 are fully accounted for. And obviously, everything in this row right here is not completely evil. That's why they're not in the pure garbage category, but you definitely want to be careful, right? All right, guys, that's it. See you guys in the comment section and the Reddit. Alright guys, don't forget to like or share the video, subscribe and hit the bell, and buy my HSP Nucleus Overload Training Program. It's the ultimate program for maximum muscle growth. It includes full body workout splits, bro splits, push-pull, home workouts, you name it. Also comes with a complete guide for macros, nutrition, fat loss, muscle growth, hormones, including a meal plan. It's pretty much all my 16 years of experience condensed into one fucking book. You're also going to get free copies of any future edition. So visit team3dalpha.com and you can use the 40% off coupon code Nucleus Overload. Or you could just buy the shit at full price. Alright guys, I'm out of here.